There's a pattern in monetary history that has destroyed 4 global reserve currencies over the last 600 years. And right now, in 2025, the United States dollar is showing every symptom of stage 4. Not stage 1, not stage 2, stage 4 out of 5. The Portuguese Real died this way. The Spanish dollar died this way. The British pound died this way. Even the Soviet ruble, though never a true global reserve currency, followed the same sequence of imperial collapse: rise to dominance, overextension, debasement, loss of trust, and then collapse. 4 times in different forms, 4 currencies, 4 complete deaths. And here's what should terrify anyone paying attention. Every single one of these currencies thought they were different. They believed their power was permanent. They had the world's trade, the world's trust, the world's demand, until they didn't. And when the end came, it came fast. Not decades, years, sometimes months. This isn't a story about empires or politics or war. This is about money. About what happens when the world's reserve currency breaks the same mathematical rules that destroyed every reserve currency before it. The pattern is clean, the sequence is predictable, and we are deep inside it right now. This is the story of how reserve currencies die, why they always think they're special, and why the math says the dollar is next.
Before we go through the 5 stages, you need to understand what a reserve currency actually is, and why losing that status is catastrophic. A reserve currency is the money that the world uses for international trade. It's what central banks hold in their vaults. It's what oil is priced in, what commodities are traded in, what debts are denominated in. When your currency is the reserve currency, you have a superpower that no other country possesses. You can print money and the world absorbs it. You run trade deficits and it doesn't matter, because everyone needs your currency anyway. You borrow cheaply because everyone wants to hold your bonds. It's an economic cheat code. And in the last 600 years, only a handful of currencies have held this status. The Portuguese Real, from roughly 1450 to 1530. The Spanish dollar, from 1530 to 1640. The British pound, from the 1700s to 1944. And the US dollar, from 1944 to today. Each one dominated global trade. Each one was considered invincible. Each one died following the exact same 5-stage pattern. And the pattern always starts the same way, with success.
Stage 1, the rise. Becoming a reserve currency isn't random. It happens because your country does something right. You build the biggest navy. You control critical trade routes. You have the most stable banks. You win wars. You innovate. Portugal got there first in the 1400s. They dominated ocean exploration. They controlled the spice trade from Asia. European merchants needed Portuguese reals to buy pepper, cinnamon, silk. The real became the currency of global commerce. Spain inherited that position after they conquered the Americas. The Spanish dollar, minted from South American silver, became the most trusted currency in the world. It was used in Europe, Asia, the Americas. It was literally called pieces of 8 because you could break it into 8 pieces and each piece held value. That's how trusted it was. Britain took over in the 1700s because they built the largest navy and the largest empire. The pound sterling was backed by gold and British military might. Every contract, every trade, every loan denominated in pounds. And after World War II, the United States inherited the crown. Bretton Woods in 1944 made the dollar the official global reserve currency, backed by gold and American dominance. At each stage, the country earned reserve status through strength, through production, through innovation, through victory. But here's the trap. Once you have reserve currency status, the temptations become irresistible because you can print money and export the inflation. You can borrow without immediate consequences. You can spend beyond your means because the world needs your currency. And that's when stage 2 begins.
Stage 2, overextension. Here's the brutal truth about reserve currency status. It enables the exact behavior that will destroy you. When the world demands your currency, you can borrow cheaply. When you can borrow cheaply, you spend recklessly. When you spend recklessly, you overextend, militarily, economically, politically. Every reserve currency follows this path. Portugal overextended trying to control trade routes across 3 continents. They built forts in Africa, Asia, South America. Tiny Portugal trying to hold a global empire. The cost was massive. The profits weren't enough. Spain did it worse. After the silver started flowing from the Americas, King Philip II believed he could afford anything. Wars everywhere, simultaneously. Against the Ottoman Empire, against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, against England, against France. Spain had military commitments on 4 continents. The cost was staggering. By 1580, half of all Spanish revenue went to the military, and it still wasn't enough. Britain fell into the same trap. By 1900, they controlled a quarter of the world's land. India, Africa, the Middle East, Australia, Canada, the Caribbean. They had to defend all of it. And when World War I started, they spent everything to win. Over $1 trillion in today's dollars. They borrowed from America, drained their gold reserves, bankrupted the empire to stay in the fight. The pattern is always the same. Reserve currency status gives you the rope. You hang yourself with it. You commit to more than you can sustain because borrowing is easy, until it isn't. The United States is following the script perfectly. We have over 750 military bases in 80 countries, troops in 150 countries. We're committed to defending Europe through NATO, defending Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, countering China, countering Russia, fighting in the Middle East. Our military budget is $850 billion annually, more than the next 10 countries combined. And it's not enough. We're stretched thin. And we're funding all of it with borrowed money, just like Spain and Britain before us. Stage 2, check. But overextension alone doesn't kill a reserve currency. What kills it is how you pay for the overextension, and that's stage 3.
Stage 3, the printing begins. When you can't pay your bills with taxes, when borrowing becomes expensive, when reality confronts ambition, every reserve currency does the same thing. They debase the currency. They print. They inflate. They destroy the money to maintain the illusion of power. Spain started this under Philip III in 1599. He introduced pure copper coins called vellon. Before this, Spain had maintained the purity of their gold and silver coins for over a century, from 1497 to 1599. But the wars were too expensive. The vellon coins were supposed to be temporary. They became permanent. By the early 1600s, Philip III doubled the face value of copper coins with the stroke of a pen. 1 mark of copper coins was worth 140 marvedis. Then suddenly, 280 marvedis. Sand copper, double the face value. The currency people trusted became inflated away. Merchants stopped accepting Spanish money at face value. They started weighing coins, testing them, refusing them. The Spanish dollar's dominance began to crumble. Britain tried to maintain a pound's value after World War I, but they shipped half their gold to America. By 1931, they couldn't hold the peg anymore. They abandoned the gold standard. The pound lost 25% of its value overnight. The global reserve currency just admitted it couldn't keep its promises. The pound kept falling. In 1940, 1 pound equaled $4. By 1980, it was worth $2, an 85% loss of value over 4 decades.
Now let's talk about the United States. In 1971, Nixon closed the gold window. The dollar was supposed to be redeemable for gold at $35 per ounce. We'd printed so many dollars to fund Vietnam and domestic programs that foreign central banks started demanding gold. We were running out, so Nixon just ended convertibility. The dollar became pure fiat currency. No backing, no anchor, just trust.
And since then, we've printed without restraint. The M2 money supply has increased over 400% since 2000. Since 2020 alone, we've created over $6 trillion. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet went from $4 trillion to $9 trillion in 2 years. We printed 40% of all dollars in existence in a 24-month period. The mechanism is different than issuing copper coins, but the result is identical: currency debasement. And just like Spain, just like Britain, we tell ourselves it's fine, it's necessary, it's different this time. It's never different. Stage 3, check. But here's the thing. Reserve currencies can survive debasement for a while. The world is slow to react. Institutions are slow to change. Inertia is powerful. What actually kills a reserve currency is stage 4. And that's where we are right now.
Before we get into stage 4, if you're starting to see the pattern here and you want to understand where this is heading, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you don't miss what comes next. And drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I want to see how global this conversation is, because what's happening to the dollar affects everyone, everywhere. All right, let's talk about stage 4, the stage we're in right now.
Stage 4, loss of trust. This is the invisible stage, the one that happens slowly, then suddenly. Stage 4 is when the world stops believing, when allies start hedging, when trade partners seek alternatives, when central banks quietly diversify. It doesn't happen with an announcement. There's no declaration. It's 1,000 small decisions that add up to catastrophe. Portugal hit stage 4 when Spanish and Dutch merchants started refusing reals, when trade shifted to other currencies, when even the Portuguese started demanding payment in Spanish silver. The real became a regional currency almost overnight. Spain hit stage 4 in the early 1600s, after decades of currency manipulation with vellon and the drain of silver to pay for imports. European merchants stopped trusting Spanish money. They started weighing coins, testing them, refusing them. Trade moved to other currencies. By 1944 at Bretton Woods, it was official. The pound was out, the dollar was in. Britain spent the next 30 years in managed decline, the pound falling year after year.
And now the dollar is in stage 4. You can see it happening in real time if you know where to look. China and Russia are trading in yuan and rubles, bypassing the dollar entirely. Saudi Arabia, which has priced oil in dollars since 1974, is now accepting yuan for Chinese oil purchases. The petrodollar system that has backed the dollar for 50 years is cracking. BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are developing alternative payment systems. They're building infrastructure to trade without dollars. They're not doing this because they hate America. They're doing it because they see stage 3. They see the printing, they see the debt, and they're hedging. Central banks are buying gold at record rates. In 2023, central banks bought over 1,000 tons of gold. China, Russia, India, Turkey, all stockpiling. Why? Because gold can't be printed. Gold doesn't have counterparty risk. Gold is the alternative when you don't trust the reserve currency.
Even allies are diversifying. The European Union has been trying to increase euro usage in trade. Japan is promoting yen-denominated contracts. These aren't hostile moves, they're rational moves. When you see a reserve currency in stage 3, you prepare for stage 4. And here's the terrifying part. Stage 4 is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more countries diversify away from the dollar, the less the world needs dollars. The less the world needs dollars, the more our printed currency comes back home. When dollars flood back to America, inflation explodes. When inflation explodes, more countries flee the dollar. It's a feedback loop, and once it starts, it accelerates. We're in the early innings of stage 4 right now. The dollar is still the dominant reserve currency.
Still 60% of global reserves. Still the most used currency in trade. But it's declining. In 2000, the dollar was 70% of global reserves. We've lost 10 percentage points in 25 years. And the pace is accelerating. 5 years ago, the idea of Saudi Arabia accepting yuan was unthinkable. Now it's happening. 5 years ago, BRICS alternatives were theoretical. Now they're operational. The trust is eroding. And once trust goes, it doesn't come back. That's the lesson from every reserve currency that came before. Stage 4 leads to Stage 5. Always.
Stage 5, the collapse. Here's what people don't understand about reserve currency death. It doesn't happen gradually. It happens suddenly. You go from dominance to irrelevance in years, sometimes months. The Portuguese Real collapsed in the 1530s when Spain's silver made it obsolete. Portugal went from controlling global trade to a regional power in a single generation. The Spanish dollar died between 1620 and 1640, 20 years from dominance to irrelevance. The debasement caught up, the alternatives emerged, and suddenly, no one wanted Spanish silver anymore. The British pound took longer, but the end was still quick. After World War II, everyone knew the pound was finished, but Britain tried to maintain pretense. In 1967, they devalued again. By 1976, they needed an IMF bailout. The currency that had ruled the world for 200 years was now dependent on international rescue packages. The pound lost 85% of its value between 1940 and 1980.
Now let's talk about what collapse actually means for ordinary people. Because this isn't abstract. When a reserve currency dies, the country that issued it goes through hell. Spain had mass unemployment, riots, economic stagnation. The silver that was supposed to make them rich forever was gone, and they had no productive economy left. They became a second-rate power and never recovered. Britain went from empire to IMF bailout in 30 years. Rationing continued in the 1950s, rolling blackouts in the 1970s, economic stagnation and decline. The wealth evaporated. In every case, the standard of living collapsed. Savings were destroyed. Purchasing power evaporated. Imported goods became unaffordable. The free ride that reserve currency status provided ended brutally. And here's the key point. It always happens faster than the country expects. Because Stage 4 is slow. Years of gradual diversification, slow erosion of trust, and then something breaks. A debt crisis, a political crisis, a war. And Stage 5 happens in months. The currency collapses, inflation explodes, trade stops, the economy seizes. It happened to Portugal, it happened to Spain, it happened to Britain. 3 times, 3 currencies, 3 collapses, all following the same pattern. And all convinced right up until the end that they were different.
So where does that leave the dollar? We've completed Stage 3. We're in Stage 4, which means Stage 5 is coming. The only question is when. Maybe we have 10 years, maybe 5, maybe less. The pattern says once you're in Stage 4, the clock is ticking. And the longer you stay in Stage 4, the more violent Stage 5 becomes. Because the adjustments that should have happened gradually get compressed into a short, brutal period. Spain could have reformed in the 1580s. They didn't. The collapse was worse. Britain could have restructured after World War I. They didn't. The collapse took longer, but was just as total. America can still make changes, cut spending, reduce debt, restore productive capacity, rebuild trust. But nothing in our politics suggests we will. We're still printing, still borrowing, still overextended, still telling ourselves it's fine, just like every reserve currency before us. The pattern says we're headed for Stage 5. The math says we can't avoid it. History says we won't change course until it's too late. The dollar has been the reserve currency for 81 years, since 1944. That's longer than the Portuguese Real lasted, longer than the Spanish dollar in its prime, approaching the lifespan of the British pound's dominance. And we're showing every symptom of late-stage reserve currency disease.
3 reserve currencies collapsed before us, all following the same sequence.
And now the dollar is at stage 4, showing every symptom, following every step, heading toward the same end. Maybe this time really is different. Maybe America will break the pattern that destroyed every reserve currency in history. Maybe we'll find a way out. But the pattern says otherwise. The math says otherwise. And history, which has watched this happen 3 times already, says we're about to learn what stage 5 looks like firsthand. If this showed you where we actually are in the sequence, hit subscribe, because when stage 5 hits, you'll want to understand what's happening and why. The answers aren't hiding in the future. They're written in the past 600 years of monetary history. And the pattern is clear.